And today we have a lovely guest called Ash Hussain from Birmingham. She is a solicitor, and I would like Ash to say a few words about herself as an introduction. Over to you, Ash.
Thank you, Zainab. So my name is Ash Hussain. I'm an experienced family lawyer. I'm 15 years qualified. I work for a practice, a solicitor's practice called Vienna Kang Advocates. We're based here in Solihull. We also have offices in Nuneaton and in Bromsgrove. And I'm 15 years qualified. I've also been recommended by name in the Legal 500. And I specialise in all aspects of matrimonial law. So I'm very passionate about family law. So anything to do with divorce, family finances, separation, children law, so any issues in relation to child arrangements, contact, with whom which parent the child should live with and spend time with, and also domestic abuse.
Okay, thank you very much, Ash, for that introduction. So it's a varied amount of work that you undertake. Before I continue on to the questions and with our discussion, I would like to say to our viewers and our listeners that should you wish to interact with today's show, please do contact us either by email on info@ramadan.fm. You can also WhatsApp or text into 077 488 55055. You can also contact us through Facebook live chat, and you can also telephone into the offices on 0116 4822 086. Thank you very much for that. So Ash, as a solicitor myself, first of all, I would like to say it's lovely to meet you, and hopefully once all of this pandemic is over and we are able to meet again, I would like to meet you face to face. In terms of the kind of area of work you do, I got asked a question once as to why I've gone into litigation, and I had my reasons. And a few people did say to me, why have I not gone into family law? I do have 4 children, etc. But being a divorcee myself and going through the pain of a divorce and seeing a few other people go through that, I don't think it's something that I can do every day. So my hat's off to you for that one, because you do have to have a thick skin when it comes to that kind of work. So I'd like to get to know a little bit more about what it is that you do, the type of areas that you have to deal with. So in terms of my first question, I'd like to ask how common it is for you to get, say, a unregistered marriage come through that now requires a divorce and has to go through the finances, where it's a bit different, where the marriage is actually registered.
And so we're seeing an increase in those inquiries, and so basically unregistered marriages are cohabitees. So it's for those couples who've not had had their marriage. So if they've had the nikah and they've not had the legal, the civil ceremony. So that's becoming increasingly common. And I think I'm also part of a group called Register Our Marriage, which is a group that's been set up by Aina Khan, who's lobbying the government to change the law and to have religious marriages recognised. And unfortunately, and it's a common problem that many women, especially my female clients who come to me or who are referred to me, they don't realise that their marriages, that if they've had the nikah, that their marriage is not legally recognised in UK law. So they then face difficulty because they cannot proceed with a divorce, an English divorce, and make financial claims in the marriage because that marriage is not legally recognised. So under English law, if you've only had the nikah and the marriage is not registered, you're treated as cohabitees, and cohabitees do not have the same rights as married couples.
Okay, that's quite interesting. This leads me on to my next question then, and it might actually work out as a comparison. We often see a lot of people here in the UK, whether they're male or female, who marry abroad. So they'll do the traditional ceremony, which could be the nikah or any other type of ceremonies, and then they come over to the UK. Now, in order for them to get their visa to come to the UK, the Home Office do recognise the nikah as a form of marriage, which is different to here in the UK, where the nikah is not actually registered as a formal marriage. So when let's say they get the nikah done abroad and then they come over to the UK, is there any special type of registration process that they would have to do in order for them to be recognised, or is it still the same process?
My understanding is that so when an individual, male or female, marries from here, so they marry like a cousin or a relative or an individual from back home in Pakistan or from India, and if they get married over there, according to those customs of Pakistan or India, the marriage customs over there, they bring their spouse over here, that marriage is legally recognized. So they don't need, so that marriage is legally recognized here. So then they are then protected. They are the issue seems the difference, and my understanding is that people here who only have the nikah, and this is even with Asian female professionals as well, I think they assume that they've entered into a common law marriage and they immediately they have rights, but they don't. So it's so important for people to be educated, for us to raise awareness of unregistered marriages, that they do not have the same. People who have only had the nikah here, then if they've not registered their marriage, they've not had the civil ceremony, that marriage is not legally recognized. But if you've married from abroad, you've brought your spouse over, you've got married to according to the customs of that country, India or Pakistan, that marriage is legally recognized.
Okay, so that's quite interesting. That's something new that I've learnt today, because my knowledge was of the opposite side, that you would still have to register. So I appreciate you clarifying that situation. I'm aware of Aina Khan, and for those who are interested, Aina has posted a lot of marketing information regarding register your marriage, and she is lobbying the government, and it's an interesting matter to actually follow, and the efforts that are going into it. In terms of the rights, what's really important for everyone listening and watching us today is that you do have rights as long as you follow the correct process in ensuring that you have access to those rights. But Ash, it's all okay for us to sit here and say, you have this right, you have that right. But more often than not, you may end up seeing clients who probably do not have the power or the authority to even request their marriage to be registered in order for them to have access to those rights. So what happens when they come to the end of their marriage? The marriage is about to become, null, divorced, terminated, and they did not know that they had those rights. What happens to those people then?
So basically, the individuals who've only had a nikah, so say they've only had the Islamic nikah, and they've not had the civil ceremony, so their marriage is not registered, so it's not legally recognized, their rights are limited. So they cannot make claims if they were, for example, into the English court for, like you would do in a divorce proceeding, if your marriage was legally recognized, and make financial claims for like property adjustment orders for spousal maintenance and for pension sharing orders. So if there is a couple, for example, female and male, and they've only had the nikah and they've bought a property in the marriage, they've bought a property in the marriage, but that property is in the husband's name, but not in the female's name, and they have maybe minor children of the marriage who are under 18. Her claims will be only dealt with through property law. So if she's asserting that she has a beneficial interest in that property, in the property owned by her husband, which was a family home, say for example she's renovated that property, she's made a financial contribution towards that property, like paying the bills, the mortgage, the court would basically, the onus would be on her to prove that she's got a beneficial interest in that property by way of her contribution, and the court would look at what the intention of the parties were at the beginning of the relationship and their course of conduct, and whether that has changed over the course of the relationship. So it's much more evidential based, but it's much more harder for that female to try and prove that she's got beneficial interest. So it's quite very, very difficult. So even if the property was in joint names, then the court would take the view that that property, they own it 50-50, but she wouldn't be able to make the other claims, like, for example, if her husband had a business or if he was earning, she wouldn't be able to claim spousal maintenance. She wouldn't be able to claim for a pension share if he had a pension, or like claims against the property as you would do if you were legally married. But if there are children involved, she could make claims under Schedule 1 of for capital provision for the children that her husband provides housing if he can afford to do so.
Okay.
So it's really important that people who have only entered into the nikah and not had the civil ceremony, and not registered that marriage, then they understand what their rights are if their relationship, that marriage, broke down, and those rights are very limited.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Ash. For the purposes of our listeners and our viewers, could you please clarify what the term beneficial means? You used it a few times, and I'm just cautious.
Yes, difference with it. So the legal ownership and beneficial ownerships in properties are different. So the legal ownership is who you like. If you go onto the when you buy a property, and that property may be registered in for example, mine and my husband's name, or just your name if you've bought the property. Beneficial interest is, for example, if you've like if you've acquired an interest in that property through it's quite complex, difficult to explain, but through like trust law. So you could have made a financial contribution, like you could have contributed to the property by living in the property and paying the mortgage or paying the bills, even though that property is in the other person's name. Legally, the other person owns that property. Or you could have given that other person the money. You could have invested money into that property to extend it, to improve the value of that property, hence acquiring a beneficial interest in that property.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Ash. In terms of the divorces and the matrimonial issues that you come across, we have been in a global pandemic for the past year and a half, or should I say year, losing track now, that's how long it's been. How much of a rise in divorce cases have you seen?
Right, this is quite an interesting question, actually. So there's a lot of debate about what's, I think a lot of people have probably read in the media that the divorce rates have increased due to the pandemic and people being forced to isolate in their homes. So from what I've seen and my experience in speaking to my peers and commentators, and just reading about what other commentators in family law have said, the first national lockdown, which we had last year, at the end of March, it went dead. It went completely quiet. And that's probably because it was a shock to everyone, what the pandemic, and people were, there was complete silence. Even like the roads, everything was empty. But after we came out of the first lockdown, I became extremely busy. So from July to probably December, that quarter, I was very, very busy. And the pandemic has, in my opinion, in my view, has had a significant impact, a toll on people's relationships. Some people's marriages and relationships have flourished, but I feel that those people's who had issues at the beginning of the first national lockdown, those issues have become exacerbated through self-isolation, people being forced to live together in each other's pocket as well. So, and also it's reported as well in the media that we see a rise in divorce rates after Christmas as well. I feel again that rise happens more towards the end of January and also in February as well. And Sir Paul Coleridge, who's the president of the marriage, he's founded the Marriage Society. He has said that basically he doesn't think that there'll be a rise in divorce rates, but that the people who are cohabiting, we will see a rise in the breakdown in their relationships. But that said, we've also seen as well a change that's coming in the UK divorce law. So Boris, our Prime Minister, has at the back end of the first lockdown introduced the Divorce Dissolution Separation Act, which has completely revolutionised the English divorce law. So under the current divorce law, we a spouse who wants to go ahead with a divorce has to rely on fault. So that's now all changed with the introduction of the new divorce law, which ends the blame game. So it's going to introduce no fault divorce. So that divorce law was passed last year, and it's going to hopefully come into force in autumn of this year. And we anticipate that there's going to be a rise in divorce rates later this year, because with the change in the new divorce law.
I can understand why. I really wish that law was there when I got divorced almost 7-8 years ago. Honestly, it would have saved a lot of heartache and pain that we all went through. Him too. It wasn't just me. In terms of the actual divorce and everything that's going through, COVID, yes, has had an effect on a lot of marriages. And like you said, most of these marriages would have had issues at the start, but it's also caused issues during the pandemic. And, a warning before I say the next piece, husband, if you are listening, I love you very much. But however, being at home constantly 24/7 cooped up has been very, very difficult. I think we have really struggled, especially because I've got a naturally loud voice. So when we were both working from home, sharing the same living room, he would, just to annoy me and frustrate me, would start tapping on the table because I was just so naturally loud. But even if I whisper, I can't whisper. But that's when you start noticing the little items of your other half. You pick up on these things. And I'm sure I irritate him just as much. But, we live and let live and move on. In terms of the pandemic, you see a rise. You see a rise towards the end of the year after the law gets passed. And you had a rise last year for a quarter. Comparing that with the area of law that I work in, we had a rise quite quickly when the pandemic happened because neighbours were noticing neighbours, neighbour disputes went on the rise and people who were owed money went on the rise. It's quite a different experience from what you've experienced to what I've experienced. But in terms of the area that you work in, I was looking up your profile yesterday and I noticed that you've got a huge clientele, it's quite varied. And I believe I came across a video of yours as well, where you spoke about prenup and postnups and those elements. Correct me if I'm wrong, it was a very quick research that I did. But I remember back in uni when I was doing my dissertation, I did a little bit on prenups, and the Radmacher case was quite famous. Yeah, that was quite famous. But I always had the impression that postnups and prenups were not really a legally valid document here. It's a contract, you enter into a contract can be breached, you can get compensation for it. But if someone was to think about looking into postnups or prenups, is that something that is as common as it is somewhere like America?
It's on the increase. It's definitely on the increase, and especially for, and as you've just said, Zainab, the prenuptial agreements, they're not binding on the English courts. They're not legally binding on the English courts. It's a contractual document between two parties. But if the prenuptial agreement is done correctly, both parties obtain independent legal advice, they enter into that prenuptial agreement, at least I think by the Law Commission's recommendation, 28 days before that marriage, and it makes provision for the weaker party, because usually it's the weaker party who's at a disadvantage, because it's the wealthy party who's trying to protect their assets entering into the marriage. But if the prenup is done correctly, they've both got independent legal advice. They understand the implications of the terms of the agreement. Then it's likely that the court will place weight on that document. But again, there's a number of factors that the court would have to take into consideration. Prenuptial agreements are more so are being used by people who are entering into second or third marriages, who have accumulated wealth from their more common, I think, in the demographic, the age range probably 50s and 60s, where people are entering into a second or third marriage and they've acquired wealth and they want to protect that marriage. Or we see a lot of where families who have want to protect their wealth, and the children of those marriages, maybe grandchildren, they're getting some pressure from elders to enter into prenuptial agreements because of a potential inheritance as well in the future. But what you have to remember with prenuptial agreements is that I think, in my opinion, they probably work more so if, for example, if you entered into a prenuptial agreement, and if the marriage was short, say 2 or 3 years, there was no children of the marriage, that prenuptial agreement is likely to have, the court's likely to place more weight on that agreement, rather than where there's been a marriage of maybe 15 or 16 years, where a prenuptial agreement was entered into 15 or 16 years ago and there's been children of the marriage. Because in my opinion, that prenuptial agreement would have faded over the passage of time. A court would place less weight on that. But bearing in mind, if you enter into a prenuptial agreement, it's important to include review clauses as well, to account for factors like, for example, every 5 years, if there's children, or if one party, becomes ill, or there's a change in that person's circumstances. So they are quite complex, but the courts will place weight on them if both parties, if you satisfy certain criteria that I've referred to.
So again, it comes down to the evidential burden. We have to satisfy that with the courts for them to place that onus on there. In terms of the post and prenups, the key take-home point here is that, again, every individual has rights, but you won't know what your rights are unless you seek that legal advice. And more often than not, I come across a lot of the times where clients will ring in, people will ring into the office, and they'll ask for a bit of advice, bit of information, and when you try to assist them, they'll turn around and say, oh, well, that's not what I'm looking for, you need to answer it like this. And sometimes they want a particular answer. It's quite difficult for us to then explain that's not how the law works. There's legislation, we have to interpret it, we then have to apply it. We can't apply it in a way that fits their notion or fits their images. Do you come across things like that in your working life?
Yeah, of course. And it's, every, with divorce, every case is, no two divorce cases are the same. So every case turns on its own facts. Every person's circumstances are different. And like you mentioned, Zainab, I think now, being a lawyer as well, clients, I think, are king. They're more demanding as well. It's very competitive outside there as well. So I think there's a lot of pressure on us lawyers as well to manage our clients' expectations. And I think it's important to set out all the options to your client from the outset and adopt a strategy that's going to work for your client, and so that to ensure that, for me especially, that I achieve a positive outcome for my client at the end of the case.
We have to act in the best interest of our clients. That's what it comes down to.
Act in the best interest of your client, and also adopt, in my view, an ethical approach as well, and manage your client's expectations, and also manage costs as well. So, absolutely, in any given matter, costs can escalate. And now I think as well, given what's happened with COVID, people are struggling, people have been furloughed. Access to legal advice, people, paying legal fees people are struggling at the moment. So for me, being a lawyer as well is being uh, I volunteer myself. I have a lot of people who are referred to me who cannot probably afford to pay me, but I'm more than happy to give, some guidance and advice to people, to the less to the people to
Sure.
the disadvantage as well. I feel that's important to give back as well.
Thank you very much for that, Ash. We have literally 8 seconds before we go on a break. So I would like to say to our listeners and viewers, please do tune back in after the break. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.
back to Ramadan Radio 87.9 FM. I am your host for today's remaining show, Zainab, and it's the legal show. Please do call in if you wish to on 0116 4822 You can also WhatsApp or text on 077 488 55055, or you can email in on info@ramadan.fm. So we have today with us Ash Hussain, who is a matrimonial divorce lawyer. I hope I've got that right, Ash. And she works in Birmingham for Vienna King Advocates. Before the break, we touched upon women's rights, or should we say rights in a marriage. I do just want to clarify to all our listeners and our viewers out there that those rights apply to men just as much as they apply to women if you are in that situation. So do remember that moving forward. We also touched upon I mentioned the irritation element, and I have a feeling that my husband is actually listening in because I've just had a message from my daughter. So again, just to reiterate that as much as I do love my husband, there were times where we were both irritated with each other, frustrated when we were cooped up in the house. Our house is small. We were having to work next door to each other. My voice is really loud. My daughter struggled. So Ash, you wanted to touch upon this a bit more. That was a
really good point you raised, because I shared a post on social media during the pandemic about how people I shared some top tips on how people can manage their irritations in relationship and reduce anxiety, because this whole coronavirus has created an added layer of anxiety. People's mental health has risen. There's been a surge in domestic abuse. So the coronavirus, I feel that the coronavirus restrictions have led to big changes in the way we live in our everyday lives. So self-isolation, social distancing, financial concerns have placed added pressure and stress on relationships and marriages. And some of the tips that I shared was that it's not a disaster, and neither is it the end of the world to find your partner irritating if you're overexposed to them. Irritations is a sign for more space, and find some space in your home and ask for the space at certain times during the day, and calm down and try and get your perspective back and recenter yourself if you're feeling irritated or frustrated with your partner. Exercise or read a book or communicate with your friends. And if the irritations are strong and constant, this may mean that there is an issue beneath the surface that has been bugging you about your partner for a while. Which has now become more obvious because we're all being forced to live with each other. So when you're communicating with your partner on any issues, try and use non-blame language and say I rather than you, and always think positively and focus on the good qualities that your partner has, and spend time with them in a positive way, which will lower the irritations. So there's just a few tips.
Well, you'll have to signpost us as to where we can go to view those tips, because I think that's quite interesting and might prove very useful for my husband when it comes to me, so that he can tell me what I need to stop doing for him. Some of the things that you mentioned in there, communication is quite key, and I think that is something that probably lacks in almost a lot of families out there, certainly from what I've seen. And I'm quite common to that as well. Sometimes if I want something communicated, actually when I communicate something to my husband, say if I want something done, I literally do like an idiot's guide. So I'll message him and I'll say, number 1, open the cupboard door. Number 2, look to your left. Number 3, turn on the light. Because that's the only way you can explain something if you want the job being done right. But equally the same with him, it's that reciprocal approach. You treat the person the way you want to be treated, and so on. I'd like to move on now in terms of quite a sensitive topic, and something that I myself have been through, and I'm quite open in talking about it as well, which a lot of people, turn around and say to me, how can you be so open? And it's that voodoo element, which is, of course, domestic violence, domestic abuse. And what I want to say to everyone listening and watching today is that please by no means be offended when we talk about this domestic abuse. It is a very real situation. A lot of people go through it. A lot of people are shunned for it. It's brushed under the carpet. It should not be. It happens. It's very real, and we need to step up if we want to make that change. So Ash, in terms of domestic violence, I want to take this topic over to you, and I want you to have a discussion with me about what it is that you want to cover regarding this.
Well, I think definitely. I think it's there's still a lot of stigma surrounding domestic abuse, especially in the Asian communities. There are a lot of people out there suffering in silence. I am increasingly in my daily practice, family law practice, seeing a number of female and male clients who have been victims of domestic abuse. The coronavirus, the pandemic, it's been widely reported that we've seen a surge in domestic abuse cases in the family home. I think it was reported at the beginning of the first national lockdown that 14 women and 2 children were killed in the first 3 weeks of the first lockdown in 2020. And I think the National Domestic Abuse Helpline, which is run by Refuge, they saw about 150% increase in traffic to their website. I did share some tips as well on social media on how victims could protect themselves from danger. And all I would, and these were some of my tips. So if you feel that you are in immediate danger in the home, then dial 999. There is also the dial 999 silent call service. So if you cannot talk, press 5 twice and the police will act upon it. There's also another tip that I shared was introducing a code word or phrase. So if you're frightened, say I need a pint of milk, to let someone know it's not safe to talk, or to ask someone to call the police on your behalf. If your partner becomes violent in the home, try and avoid rooms in the property where there may be weapons, like the kitchen and garage. Always ensure that your mobile phone is charged and is with you at all times. And maintain contact with family, friends and neighbours and work colleagues through technology daily. So I appreciate with the coronavirus restrictions, a lot of people, especially victims of domestic abuse, would have been in a situation where normally pre-pandemic, to escape from any abuse, they would have been able to go out, meet their friends, go and visit families, go out on the school run where, an outside agency may have been able to pick up on something, but that no longer was the case during the pandemic, which is one of the reasons why we saw the surge in domestic abuse. So but there's also legal protection that's available under the law for domestic abuse victims as well. And during the pandemic, the courts have also had to adapt and use to technology, like all of us. And the courts have been working remotely as well. And there is legal protection available for domestic abuse victims, and you can apply for a non-molestation order, which is like an injunction. It works like an injunction. You can apply for that on an emergency, on an ex parte basis, which means that you're making that application without notice to the other party, because you genuinely feel that if that other party knew that you were making that application, then you or the children would be at risk of significant harm. So there is protection available where an ex-partner or a former partner, if they're using or threatening violence against you or the children, or they're intimidating or harassing or pestering you, the court can put a non-molestation order in place to ensure the health, safety and well-being of yourself and the children. And also, if you are in the home and you don't feel safe in continuing to live with your partner, or you've left the family home because of domestic violence and you want to return to the family home and you want to exclude your abuser, you can also apply to the court for an occupation order. And an occupation order regulates who can live in the family home, and it can also restrict your abuser from entering the surrounding area as well. So those are just some of the protections available under the law. And I'd also just like to say as well that when people talk about domestic abuse, a lot of I think we align ourselves to domestic abuse being just physical, but it's not just physical. Domestic abuse also covers emotional, psychological, sexual and financial abuse, as well as controlling coercive behaviour. And the Domestic Abuse Bill, which is going to introduce major reforms, has had its second reading, I think from memory, in the House of Lords, and it's also going to create a statutory definition of domestic abuse to include the terms which that I've just referred to, and also some major reforms to protect domestic abuse victims.
Thank you very much for that. I appreciate that, Ash. Can I just ask you to repeat that very important emergency call? Because somebody like myself who is educated, I don't class myself as highly educated, even though I am a solicitor, and people always tell me off when I say things like that. I was not aware of the silent 999 call. Are you able to just reiterate that for those people who have missed it, please?
So if you can dial the 999 silent call service, and if you cannot talk, you press 5 twice and the police will act upon it. There's also the National Domestic Abuse Helpline, which is run by Refuge, and their number is 0808 200 0247. And Refuge also now has a web form as well, which allows a victim to set up a safe time to receive a call. And also for men as well, there's the men's advice line as well, which is 0808 801 9999.
Thank you very much for that, Ash. I'm glad you touched upon the men element of it, because it is also a very real issue for men. I have seen men firsthand who have suffered at the hands of their female partners domestic abuse, and their mindset is slightly different to us women. You know, some women may have that confidence in terms of approaching someone else, but for men, that they have stigma as well, just as much as domestic violence.
You've hit the nail on the head. So, and that probably linked as well, because men don't talk. I think research has shown that us females talk more. So, if we're about to go through a divorce proceedings, or, we reach out to our family, our friends, we talk about things, whereas I think men are more, their mindsets are different, they're more compartmentalized. And it's also research has shown that men's mental health suffers more than women post-divorce as well, and for the reason because men worry more about if there's children involved, access to their children as well. And sometimes you see in situations, especially from my experience, where women may restrict or become more of a recalcitrant mother and try and antagonize matters in terms of child arrangements because of acrimonious issues between husband and wife, and the male may then become more controlling of the finances. So we see that happen, and I think that needs to be identified. And I think there's discussions can take place between the spouses to try and minimize conflict and distress. And I think that's why it's really important as well at the beginning of a divorce process or separation process. Self-care is very important. So any male or female who's about to embark on a divorce journey, they go and seek professional help and seek emotional support from a professional. There's a lot of divorce coaches out there as well, now experienced coaches who can help on the emotional side for spouses who are about to go through the divorce journey.
It's the stigma attached to the men, which is men don't cry, but actually I see no no issues with a man, with a man crying, things like that, when men are just as much emotional and human beings as females, and the emphasis should now shift as well. We talk about equality. There should be equality in this as well. It's a very real issue. In terms of the secret code that you just touched upon, I'm sure I read somewhere, and I can't remember it fully, so I'm hoping you can fill the gaps in with this. There is also now pharmacies
You're right.
participating in this code.
Correct.
Could you touch on that as well, please?
I did a post, I remember when it came again. So you can go to the, I think, is it Boots or the pharmacies?
There's quite a few pharmacies that have signed up to it.
They've signed up to it. So you can go to the pharmacy, and then there's a code word, an alert. You can alert them, and then they can notify the relevant organizations to help you. Because remember, if you're in a very abusive relationship, and you've got a perpetrator you've been subject to domestic abuse, that victim is very, very vulnerable. They're very, very scared. There needs to be, so going out and just going, reaching out, going to the pharmacy, going to pick up something, you can. There is a code word that's my understanding that's been introduced, and then the pharmacy can help and contact the relevant organisation to give that victim support and help that they need.
Thank you very much for that, Ash. Whilst you were talking, I thought I'd just quickly Google it and see what the pharmacy code word is. And if I can get it up on time, hopefully I should be able to see it. It is from 14th of January. Boots, it did show about Boots, but it says the Ask for Annie scheme. That's it, ANI. So you ask for Annie. So to the people out there listening and watching, there are ways for you to approach organizations and companies like Boots, like pharmacies who have signed up to this, for you to get that much needed assistance. Don't be shy. If you need to talk about it, please do so, because it is a very real issue, and there are people out there, there are organizations out there who want to help. So we are coming towards the end of the session, Ash. We have about 1 minute and 30 seconds left, and we've covered a huge variety of information here, and it might be information overload to everyone that is listening and watching. And if there is something that we've touched upon that people do want a bit more information, do contact a solicitor, do contact those organizations that can help. I'm sure if you were to reach out to Ash Hussain at her law firm, she's been willing to help, and there's plenty more others out there that are there for your assistance. The key take-home point I've taken from here is that men and women have rights. We do need to speak up a little bit more. We do need to reach out for the assistance that's required. And there is a very real issue here in the UK where if you have your nikah done, it's not registered, whether you're the male or the female. And if you are then living, albeit as an Islamic married couple, in English jurisdiction, it's not recognized as an English marriage, and therefore your rights are quite limited. So do seek out assistance on that point. I hope I've covered everything there, Ash, in terms of what we wanted to say.
Definitely, yeah. There's some really salient points that we've covered today, and I'd just like to say that anyone who's about to go through a separation or divorce is life-changing. It's one of the biggest stresses, triggers for stress in a person's lifetime, and think you should consider marriage counselling. Take time to consider the future, reflect, and don't rush into making a decision, and get legal advice. Ensure that you have a full understanding of your legal rights, male or female, and understand what your options and responsibilities are.
Thank you very much for that, Ash. Apologies to interrupt. We literally have 4 seconds on the clock. So to everybody listening in and tuning in, Jazakallah so much.